I moved into the house on Maple Street in early fall. It was a small rental behind a bigger property, basically an old guest house that had been turned into a cheap place for people like me who didn't mind something a bit older and worn out. I liked that it stood a little removed from the main street. The backyard opened toward a line of trees, and behind that was a downward slope the landlord said used to be part of an old drainage system the city never finished. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I was more focused on settling in, trying to get used to the new job, and keeping my expenses low. The place wasn't perfect. The plumbing groaned, the walls were thin, and the yard felt overgrown in certain corners, especially near the tree line, where the grass didn't grow well. But it was fine for me. During the first few weeks, nothing strange happened. I worked long shifts and came home tired. Most nights, I only noticed how quiet the entire area was. People didn't walk much around there, and the house behind mine had older residents who went to bed early. I assumed the backyard would stay peaceful. The first odd moment happened on a Saturday morning. I was doing laundry and walked outside to hang a few things that couldn't go into the dryer. My foot sank slightly into the soil near the back. It was softer than usual, like something underneath had shifted. I wouldn't have thought twice about it, except I noticed the grass around that area looked different. It wasn't just longer. It was patchy, with harder dirt underneath, like it had been cleared or moved recently. A few feet away, near the base of the slope, I saw a round concrete rim sticking up just a little above the ground. It was covered by a heavy metal grate that had rusted around the edges. From the angle, I realized it wasn't just a small drain. This thing was big enough for a person to crawl into. I crouched down and brushed away some dirt and leaves. It didn't look new, but it also didn't look abandoned. The metal grate didn't have the level of rust I would expect if it hadn't been touched in decades. I pulled on it out of curiosity, expecting it to be sealed or too heavy. It didn't budge. I figured that was that. I went back inside and didn't think about it again for a few days. But then I started hearing something at night. At first, it sounded like regular house noise, pipes shifting, maybe small animals outside. But the pattern was strange. It came from the back wall, the one closest to the slope. The sound was faint, like someone dragging something slow across dirt. It was always between midnight and 2 a.m. The first couple of times, I chalked it up to raccoons or stray cats. Then one night, I heard a thud. Not loud, but too heavy for an animal. It made me sit up in bed. I listened. After a minute, another thud came from the same direction. I turned on the porch light and stepped outside. Nothing looked off. The trees swayed a little, but the yard was empty. I walked closer to the tree line and scanned around, but I didn't go near the drain grate. I didn't want to go digging into something I didn't understand in the dark. The next morning, though, I checked again. The dirt around the grate looked disturbed. Not dramatically, but straight-line patterns marked the dust on the grate itself, as if fingers had gripped it. I stopped in place when I noticed that. It was such an odd shape, too narrow for animal prints. I crouched and pressed my hand on the metal, trying to see if the pattern matched mine. It didn't. The marks were thinner, longer. I convinced myself someone might have come through the yard, maybe kids, maybe someone exploring, and they tried to lift it. I didn't know the neighborhood well, and sometimes bored teenagers did weird things. I'm not the type who jumps straight to the worst conclusion. The week after that was when things turned more obvious. I woke up one night to the sound of something metallic scraping. I'm a light sleeper, so it snapped me awake instantly. I sat up and listened hard. The noise came from directly outside my bedroom window. The grate. I knew it without question. Something or someone was trying to shift it. I climbed out of bed as quietly as I could and stood by the window. I didn't lift the blinds. I didn't want to alert anyone. I just listened. The scraping was steady and rhythmic, like someone working a tool under the edge of the grate. For seconds. Pause. For seconds. Pause. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel my pulse in my throat. I grabbed my phone and started recording audio. I didn't turn on any lights. I didn't step outside. I waited maybe 20 minutes before the scraping finally stopped. When it went quiet, I slowly lifted the blind just enough to look out. I expected darkness, maybe a shadow or animal. But what I saw was worse, nothing. Nothing at all. The yard was empty and still. No movement, no shape, no sign of a person. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I went outside before work. When I reached the slope, my stomach dropped. The grate had been shifted a few inches off its original position. It wasn't removed entirely, but it was rotated and tilted. The dirt that usually rested around the rim was pushed outward, like someone had used leverage from inside. Inside, that was the part one kept avoiding in my mind. It wasn't someone trying to get into the tunnel. It was someone trying to get out. I didn't know who to call. The police weren't going to take my story seriously. Hey, I think someone lives in the old drainage system behind my yard. They'd either dismiss it as animals or trespassers and file a report that wouldn't change anything. So I did what I shouldn't have done. I tried to handle it myself. One afternoon, I borrowed a crowbar from work and used it to pry the grate fully open. It took a surprising amount of force, but once it started moving, it swung aside easily. That alone made me uneasy. Something had weakened the rust around the edges recently. When I looked inside, I felt a cold shock. The tunnel went down about 6 feet, then flattened into a large concrete pipe that stretched straight ahead into darkness. The smell wasn't as bad as I expected. It wasn't the usual mildew or stagnant water. It smelled more like dirt and something faintly metallic. I checked the ground. Footprints. Clear ones. Bare footprints. That stopped me from climbing down immediately, but I still crouched and held my phone flashlight down the pipe. About 15 feet in, the tunnel turned to the right, and just at that bend, something was resting against the wall. A white plastic bucket, faded dirty. Next to it were things I recognized instantly. A folded blanket, a water bottle, a pair of shoes. Someone had been staying there. Recently. I didn't climb inside. I didn't want to find out more than that. I put the grate back, pushed soil around the edges, and tried to pretend everything was fine. But after seeing what I saw, going back inside felt worse. The whole time, I kept thinking, if they could move the grate at night, they could do it again. And they were only 15 feet from the surface. I barely slept that night. Every sound felt sharper. Every creak made my skin crawl. I kept imagining someone crawling out of the ground and walking toward the door. The next morning, I made up my mind to talk to the landlord. He didn't sound surprised when I brought up the drain pipe. That annoyed me. He said the whole drainage project was abandoned years ago, and the city should have sealed it. But you know how budgets are. I asked if someone could be living in there. He hesitated too long before saying, "Unlikely." That hesitation stuck with me. I pressed harder, and he finally admitted that the main house, the one in front of mine, had been broken into a year earlier, and the homeowners at the time reported hearing footsteps under their floor before it happened. They thought it was animals until they found muddy prints inside their laundry room one morning. The police never found the person. My landlord swore nothing had happened since then, but I didn't believe him. If someone had used the old tunnel to break into a house once, what stopped them from doing it again? That night, I heard footsteps outside my window again. Not scraping, not thuds, slow footsteps in the grass. I didn't move from my bed. I didn't breathe loudly. I just listened. The steps circled toward the back door, paused for a long time, then walked away toward the slope. I waited until morning before going outside. The grate was open, wide open this time, and the footprints leading away from it weren't going back into the tunnel. They were heading toward the side of my house. Muddy, clear, and unmistakably human. That was the day I packed up and left. I didn't wait for anything else. I didn't call the landlord. I didn't call the police. I grabbed what I could and drove straight to a friend's place. A week later, I checked the rental listing out of curiosity. The place was already back up for rent. The description made no mention of the drain pipe. The yard photos didn't show the slope. It looked peaceful in the pictures, like nothing was wrong at all. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. And I know someone down there used the tunnel as a hiding place, maybe for years. I still wonder where they went after that last night. I also wonder how many other neighborhoods have tunnels nobody talks about. I used to volunteer at an elementary school in a small town in northern Utah. It wasn't anything official. My niece went there, and the school was always short-staffed when it came to simple maintenance tasks. I had free time after work and didn't mind handling basic things like replacing light bulbs, organizing storage rooms, or helping clean up after school events. The school wasn't old, but it had been built on top of an even older building, and certain parts of the property showed their age. One of those parts was the rear service area behind the cafeteria. It was the kind of spot nobody paid attention to unless they worked there. A narrow concrete walkway ran behind the building, and the school kept its huge garbage bins and recycling containers back there. A tall wooden fence separated that spot from the homes behind it. Teachers barely passed through except when throwing out large boxes or taking out event trash. The janitors handled everything else. There was one thing back there that always looked out of place. A metal door built into the brick wall behind the cafeteria. It sat low and wide, almost too wide for normal use, like a garage door shrunk down. It was bolted shut with thick screws. The paint around it was chipped. The hinge metal was old and worn. When I first asked the janitor, his name was Bill, what it was, he told me something I found strange. He said the door led into a utility tunnel from the school that stood there decades before the new one was built. According to him, the tunnel connected to a bigger network the town tried developing during the Cold War era. The project was abandoned halfway, and the school eventually got rebuilt on top of part of it. The tunnel was sealed off, supposedly for safety reasons. I didn't question it back then. It sounded like one of those quirky stories small towns have. But every time I passed that door, I had this weird sense it didn't match the rest of the building. The brick around it was older. The bolts looked newer, and the paint looked like it had been redone several times to hide rust that kept coming back. The first strange thing happened on a late November afternoon. I was helping sort through old equipment after a school fair. I needed to toss a few broken cardboard panels and duct tape props, so I walked to the back service area. It was chilly and the daylight faded fast. When I reached the dumpsters, I noticed the metal door looked different. The bottom left bolt wasn't flush against the wall. It had been turned slightly, not enough to fall out, but enough that it didn't line up with the other three bolts. I crouched to look closer. The screw head had a pattern of scratches on it, as if someone had tried loosening it with a tool recently. I looked around the area. Nothing seemed disturbed. The fence was intact. The dumpsters weren't moved. No footprints in the dirt. But I couldn't shake the feeling someone had been trying to get the bolt out. I tightened it with my fingers, but it barely moved, so I let it go. I didn't report it. I figured it was just loose from age. The next few weeks were normal. Then winter break came, and with the school empty, the place felt different, quiet in a way that bothered me. I came a couple of times to help Bill with inventory because it was easier to work without teachers walking around. One day, while stacking old folding chairs near the back hallway, I heard a faint metallic sound. It came from outside, behind the cafeteria. It wasn't loud, but it was a clear pattern. Scrape, pause, scrape again. I froze for a moment, then walked to the back door and stepped outside. The sound stopped immediately. I stood there for several seconds. The cold air stung my face. I listened carefully, but the area was silent. When I walked over to the dumpsters, I didn't see anything unusual, but the metal door caught my eye again. This time, two of the bolts were slightly rotated. The bottom left one and the top right. It was subtle, but definitely changed from how I remembered them. Something was trying to get that door open. I went back inside and found Bill. I asked him about it again. He got quiet, then shrugged it off too quickly. "Kids messing around," he said. "Probably some older kids jumping the back fence. Nothing to worry about." His tone didn't match the explanation. He said it in a way that felt rehearsed. After that conversation, I watched that door closer than before. Every time I was back there, the bolts seemed a little different. It was never all four bolts at once, just one or two at a time, like someone was loosening them slowly over several nights. Then something happened that made me stop shrugging it off. In mid-January, the school reopened. I was there on a Friday afternoon, helping carry in some box supplies. It was getting dark when I stepped outside to toss plastic wrap into the recycling. As I walked toward the bins, I heard something from behind the door. A voice. Not loud, not clear, more like a slow mumble. It wasn't a kid. The pitch was lower, adult-sounding, and the way it spoke, if you could call it speaking, was unsettling, like someone was talking to themselves in a frustrated tone. The words weren't clear enough to understand. I stood there frozen because I knew exactly where the sound was coming from. The metal door. I backed away slowly. I didn't want to make noise. I didn't want to get closer to confirm anything. I didn't even look directly at the door. I just walked back inside and found a teacher still packing up for the day. I didn't say anything to her because it felt too strange to explain without sounding paranoid. That night, I didn't sleep well. Over the next few days, I tried acting normal, but the idea of someone being inside that old tunnel wouldn't leave my mind. I didn't know if it was a vagrant, a disturbed person, or something worse. I debated telling the principal, but I didn't want to risk becoming the guy who cried wolf unless I had proof. That proof came on a windy Wednesday. The kids had been dismissed early due to a staff development day. I stuck around to help Bill haul some old tables to the dumpster area. When we turned the corner, we both stopped walking at the same time. The metal door was open. Not fully, not wide, but open enough to see darkness behind it. The bottom half had been pulled outward just 3 inches. Enough to see inside. Enough to confirm something was definitely wrong. All 4 bolts lay on the ground. They weren't dropped randomly. They were placed in a perfect line right next to the frame. Bill went pale. He muttered something under his breath and walked faster than I had ever seen him walk. He grabbed the edge of the door and forced it shut, then dragged a metal pallet over and leaned it against the door like a makeshift barricade. After he caught his breath, he called the principal and said there was a maintenance emergency, but refused to say more. I stayed quiet the whole time. He didn't want to talk about it until later, when he finally admitted the truth. He said the tunnel wasn't fully sealed. The city closed it off at one end decades ago, but it still led into an unfinished network beneath the residential area behind the school. He said he'd heard noises before too, especially at night, and he suspected someone lived down there off and on. But every time he brought it up, the district told him not to escalate things unless he had solid proof. But the door being open was proof. He knew it. I knew it. The next morning, the district sent a contractor crew. They told everyone the door was unsafe and being permanently welded shut. They put up caution tape, brought power tools, and worked for hours. They welded the hinges. They sealed every gap. They installed thick reinforcement plates. By the end of the day, the door looked like a permanent part of the wall. But the story didn't end there. The following Monday, a police cruiser parked behind the school for several hours. I didn't see what they were doing, but the officer walked the fence line behind the dumpsters several times. He also checked the ground by the cafeteria wall and took photos. Nobody explained why he was there. The next week, Bill quietly told me something that made my stomach drop. The contractors found things inside the door before welding it. They didn't say exactly what, but one of them told Bill there were signs someone had been staying in the tunnel very recently. Sleeping materials, food wrappers, a bucket, and the remains of a small fire built directly on the concrete floor. The crew also found long scratch marks along the inside of the door. The marks went across the whole surface, in a pattern that suggested someone had pushed against it with both hands, repeatedly. Nobody knew how long someone had been down there. Nobody knew how they got in or where else the tunnel connected. The district notified the police. The police didn't share details, but for the next few weeks, parents weren't allowed near the back service area. Teachers avoided it entirely. 3 months later, I stopped volunteering because I got a different job. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen or heard. It felt like something the school wanted buried, literally and figuratively. Still, every now and then, when I drive past the school, I look toward the back of the building. I know the door is welded shut now, but that doesn't make me feel better. It just makes me wonder whether the person in that tunnel moved somewhere else when the door finally sealed. I think about the scratched bolts, the mumbling voice, the way someone loosened the door no more than a bolt or two per night, as if they were being careful not to draw attention. Whoever was trying to get inside the school did it slowly, patiently, and deliberately, and I don't think that kind of person just stops. I worked at a small family-run corner store on the outskirts of Helena, Montana, for a couple years in my early 30s. My uncle owned it, but he didn't have the patience to run the day-to-day operation, so he asked me to manage things during the weekdays. It wasn't busy most of the time. We had the same group of regulars, the same quiet hours, and the same old layout that hadn't changed much since the 1950s. The building was older than that, though. My uncle once joked that the place probably stood during Prohibition, and I figured he was right, because the basement foundation looked older than the rest of the structure. Thick concrete, mismatched stone sections, and an odd draft that always came from the left side of the basement despite no obvious vents. For the first several months, I barely spent time down there. I only went into the basement to grab stock items or stack extra crates. But during late fall, I started hearing a new complaint from customers. People said something smelled strange in the store, like stagnant water or old fabric. They weren't rude about it. They just mentioned it in passing. I went downstairs one afternoon to see if anything had spilled. That was when I noticed an area where the wall looked slightly wet. It wasn't dripping, but the concrete had darkened in a square shape about 3 feet across. The square was too perfect to be an accident. The edges were straight. Even the corners were crisp. That made me think it wasn't water at all. It looked like that section of wall had been patched, probably decades earlier. I asked my uncle about it that weekend. He shrugged and said the shop had a weird hatch down there when he bought it. He didn't bother with it because the inspector said it was sealed tight. That confused me because I had never seen a hatch. When I described the square on the wall, he nodded like he finally remembered something. He told me the old owner claimed the building once had access to a tunnel system used by bootleggers. Supposedly, the tunnel let suppliers move alcohol during Prohibition without being seen on the streets. He made it sound like a joke, but I could tell he didn't actually know the full story. A few days later, something happened that made me pay closer attention. I was alone in the store at closing time. I went down to lock up the back basement door, which opened into a small dirt lot behind the shop. While I was down there, I heard a soft clicking sound coming from the far end of the basement. It didn't sound mechanical, more like a light tapping, irregular and slow. I looked toward the wall with the dark square. The sound seemed to come from behind it. I tried convincing myself it was something ordinary. Pipes, wood settling, rodents. But none of those explanations made sense for that sound. The tapping came in pairs sometimes. A short pause, then another tap. like someone thinking between movements. I didn't investigate further that night. I finished closing procedures and went home. But the next morning, the smell inside the store was stronger than before. Not rotten or moldy, more like damp clothes and stale air that came from a closed-off space. I spent that entire morning thinking about the sound. By afternoon, I made up my mind that I needed to look at that wall more carefully. I waited until business slowed down. Then I grabbed a crowbar, a flashlight, and a pair of gloves. When I went downstairs, the temperature felt noticeably cooler near the wall. It wasn't freezing, just a steady cold draft that didn't belong in a basement without windows. I pressed my hand against the square. The concrete felt slightly different, almost hollow. I tapped it gently and heard a dull echo rather than a solid thud. The surrounding wall sounded normal. That confirmed it. There was something behind the patch. Before prying anything open, I slid a crate in front of the basement door to keep customers from wandering down there. Then I wedged the crowbar into the edge of the square as hard as I could. It took multiple attempts, but the edge finally cracked. A thin line appeared. I worked along the top edge, then the left side. After several minutes, the entire square broke loose. The slab didn't fall forward, though. It leaned inward slightly and then stuck. I pulled it toward me and felt it shift. When it finally came out, it revealed a rectangular opening about 3 feet wide and almost 5 feet tall. Beyond it was a tunnel. Not a modern one, not a utilities access way. This was old. Brick walls, hand-laid, with an arched ceiling. Dirt floor. Long stretches of darkness that stretched farther than my flashlight could reach. I stood at the entrance for a long moment, just taking in what I was seeing. I wasn't scared yet, more stunned than anything. Because the tunnel didn't feel dangerous at first. It felt abandoned, forgotten. The air that drifted from it was cold, but not foul. I stepped inside, only far enough to shine my flashlight around. There were wooden beams along the walls, old and splintering. Some had numbers carved into them, maybe from surveyors. I saw old crates scattered around. Most were broken apart. A few still held glass bottles with faded labels. I understood then what my uncle meant. This looked exactly like an old Prohibition transport route. The bottles were unlabeled, but their shape and color matched old whiskey containers. I wanted to go deeper, but I forced myself to stay near the entrance. I told myself I'd come back later with more time. I'd also need to tell my uncle what I found so he could decide what to do next. Before leaving the tunnel, I turned around to climb back into the basement. That's when I saw something on the floor near the entrance that I swear wasn't there before. Footprints. Fresh ones. Human. Barefoot. They were in the dust, just a few feet inside the opening. The prints led deeper into the tunnel, away from the basement, not toward it. I crouched down and looked closer. The footprints were small, not child-sized, but not large either. Maybe the size of a smaller adult or a teenager. The imprint edges were clean. The dust around them hadn't settled. They had been made recently. That was the moment I realized someone was in the tunnel. Not long ago. Possibly even right then. I backed out slowly. I didn't hear anything behind me, but I didn't feel alone. No way was I going deeper without help. I closed the basement and locked the upstairs door. I told my uncle everything that same evening. He seemed more annoyed than alarmed at first, but he agreed to check it out the next morning. He didn't want us touching anything until he saw it with his own eyes. The next day, before opening the store, we both went downstairs. When we reached the wall, the opening was still there. I expected everything to look exactly as I left it, but something had changed. The footprints were gone. The dust had been disturbed in a wide sweep, like someone dragged their hand or a piece of cloth across the floor to wipe them away. That confirmed it. Someone had been active in the tunnel after I left, and they didn't want anyone to know they were there. My uncle didn't say much at first. He just stared at the tunnel opening, rubbing his jaw. After a while, he told me not to enter the tunnel again. He wasn't the type to believe in paranormal stuff, so his concern told me he was thinking something more grounded, like a trespasser, a squatter, or someone hiding from the police. Before we opened for customers, he called the city's non-emergency number to ask about the tunnel. They told him the records for older underground structures were incomplete. They confirmed tunnels existed in parts of the original town grid, but most were sealed or abandoned. They didn't provide any clear boundaries of where they ran. For the next few days, my uncle told me to stay out of the basement unless absolutely necessary. We didn't block it off, but we avoided going down there unless restocking. We both acted like everything was normal, but both of us knew someone was in that tunnel. I only heard the tapping sound one more time, late in the evening when I was restocking shelves. I went completely still and listened. The tapping was faint, coming from beneath me, somewhere far under the floor panels. A few seconds later, it stopped again. I didn't investigate. There was no point. Things escalated about a week later. It was a Tuesday evening. Business was slow. I was mopping the back of the store when I heard a thump from the basement. Not loud, not violent, but clear enough to make me stop. It sounded like someone bumped into a crate. I walked to the basement door and opened it, staying at the top of the stairs. I listened. The air down there felt colder than usual. Still no follow-up sound. I backed away again. I told myself it could be anything. Settling wood, a mouse pushing something over. But I didn't believe that. That night, I convinced my uncle that we needed to seal the tunnel entrance again. Even if someone was inside, at least we could block them from entering the shop. He agreed. He said we'd deal with it the next day. The next morning, I opened the store like always. My uncle said he'd come by later with cement mix and tools. When I finally went downstairs, I froze halfway across the room. The tunnel opening was different. The concrete square panel I had pried off the week before wasn't on the floor anymore. It was leaned upright against the far wall, about 10 feet away. It didn't fall. Someone carried it, and something else bothered me even more. Right in front of the tunnel entrance, on the dirt floor inside, sat a single object, a plastic bag from our store. Inside it were two items we sold upstairs, a bottle of water and a bag of trail mix. Someone had taken them from the store after hours and left them at the tunnel entrance, like it was some kind of message. I ran upstairs and checked the register logs. Nothing suggested a break-in, but when I looked more carefully, I saw that one of the small basement windows, the ones covered by wire mesh, had been pushed inward. The mesh was pried loose, not fully removed, but opened enough for a small person to slip through. The basement, the tunnel, the footprints, the wiping of tracks, it all lined up. Someone had been slipping in and out, maybe for weeks. I called my uncle immediately. He left work and rushed over. After he saw the bag, he agreed we needed to call the sheriff's office this time. When a deputy arrived, he went into the basement and shined his own flashlight down the tunnel. He didn't enter it. He just stood there for several minutes, examining what he could see. Then he came back upstairs. His opinion was straightforward. Someone was living down there, possibly multiple people. He told us not to enter again. He said the sheriff's office would contact the city about sealing the tunnel and checking for other entrances in the area. For the next 3 days, the store stayed open, but neither my uncle nor I went downstairs. We kept the basement door locked and used only the main floor inventory. Every time the building settled, I flinched. Every time the cooler hummed louder than usual, I thought someone was moving under us. Finally, on that 4th morning, a city crew arrived with 2 sheriff's deputies. They went downstairs and inspected everything. One of the workers sealed the small window. Another crew member mixed concrete and began patching the tunnel entrance. They didn't ask for my help, and I didn't offer any. While they worked, one deputy came upstairs and asked me a few questions about the timing and the noises. I answered everything honestly. At one point, I asked him if they found anyone inside the tunnel. He shook his head. He said the tunnel went farther than they anticipated and had several branches. They didn't have the manpower to explore the entire length right then, but they saw signs of recent activity. Bedding material, wrappers, a small lantern, and a pile of clothing. No weapons, thankfully. He didn't say anything about footprints, but I knew he saw them. By sunset, the tunnel entrance was sealed behind a thick new layer of reinforced concrete. The workers left a note saying they'd come back to reinforce the basement windows and inspect the foundation again. My uncle and I closed up that night, relieved but uneasy. The store felt different now. Not exactly unsafe, just unsettled, like we had uncovered something that should have stayed buried. A couple days later, we were told the city planned to fill the tunnel further down, near a junction point several blocks away. I don't know if they ever fully blocked the whole structure. I hope they did, but part of me doubts it. Those tunnels stretched farther than anyone realized. There were probably entrances under houses, sheds, or old buildings scattered across the neighborhood. After that, I worked at the store for another year, but the basement never felt normal again. Even with the tunnel sealed, I still heard faint noises sometimes. They weren't as clear as before, and I don't know if they were real or just my imagination. The part that bothers me most isn't the footprints or the tapping. It's the plastic bag left at the tunnel entrance. Whoever put it there knew exactly what they were doing. They picked items from our shelves. They brought them inside without rushing or disturbing anything else. And they placed them just inside the tunnel opening like a signal. That wasn't random. That wasn't casual. It was intentional. And I still wonder what they were trying to say.